House Republicans have been ordered to shut down the government and hurt the very working class Americans that many of them pretend to want to help.
A bipartisan deal to fund the government is effectively dead, and now Congress is barreling toward a government shutdown starting this weekend with no clear solution. The deal was negotiated over several months between top Democrats and Republicans, but started to unravel yesterday with a barrage of social media posts by billionaire and Republican kingmaker Elon Musk. Musk wrote over 100 posts on X criticizing the funding plan as the worst bill ever written, while amplifying falsehoods about what it includes. President-elect Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance eventually joined in, forcing House Speaker Mike Johnson to cancel votes on the bill. Joining us to discuss the latest is Alex Gangitano, White House reporter here at the Hill. Lots of developments going on throughout the day, people going in and out of House Speaker Johnson's office. What's the latest?
That's right. He's trying to figure out something to keep the government open, something to look at this debt limit issue, which is what Trump has now called to eliminate the debt limit. He told Republicans that anybody who votes for a bill that doesn't include something to do with the debt limit will be primaried. He's starting to put out these threats. And so Speaker Johnson is trying to figure out, how do I recreate a bill at this point that Trump will be okay with? I can prevent a government shutdown. And I can also keep my speakership, because right now he's looking at a lot of people who, if he doesn't do something that makes Trump world happy, he could be losing the gavel come January 3rd. So he's under a lot of pressure, and I think that's why we're seeing him today talk with individual lawmakers in his office, because he's trying to figure out who's with me, who's against me, and how can I appease everybody. Some
needle he's trying to thread there. Let's talk about raising the debt limit. This wasn't actually supposed to be dealt with until this summer. Now Trump says he wants it included in this package. This is something Republicans have opposed in the past, and these deals are usually negotiated over months. I mean, the notion that this would be able to, a deal would be able to reach on this, that would get votes from Republicans who have never voted for raising the debt limit, seems pretty unlikely.
That's right. I mean, the last time this was raised, when it was President Biden, Speaker McCarthy negotiating it, it took several weeks, and there was a lot of controversy about the negotiations and such. I mean, this is a whole nother ballgame we're talking about after CR negotiations. You know, this is supposed to be separated. It's also like the concept of eliminating it has been something that Democrats have called for, and now we have President-elect Trump calling for this. So I think Speaker Johnson, as much as he's been in communication with Mar-a-Lago and the Trump team, it feels like he was caught a little off guard here, which I'm sure seems surprising to him, considering he is an ally of Trump. He's somebody who is close with them, and now suddenly Trump's bringing up this whole other negotiation inside of the CR.
Yeah, this all seems very last minute. These guys hang out all the time. They were all at the Army-Navy game together last week. Right. Do they not talk about this?
That's the big question. They were literally just together. As I mentioned, Johnson's very close with Trump world. But what happened on Wednesday is suddenly Elon Musk was, as you mentioned, posted 100 times on X about this. Then we heard from Vivek Ramaswamy, his co-lead on the Doge team. And then we heard from Donald Trump Jr. about the bill, about opposing it. And then we heard from Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance about it. And so it seemed like things just started stirring very quickly once Musk, and as you mentioned, he was sharing a lot of information that was falsehoods about what's in the bill, but it got people seeing his tweets, talking, and then other people started to oppose it. And then suddenly we heard from Trump, and it was like, that's the end. Johnson really could have held a vote on this if he had put out the CR a little bit earlier, gotten things moving a little earlier, before Trump even got involved, and now he's back to the drawing board.
The Dems say that a deal is a deal, and they're not going to further negotiate something that was already agreed to. They say they're not even convinced it's actually Republicans running the show here. Let's take a listen.
Look, billionaires are running the show here. And so what I want to say to people is, you thought you voted for Trump. You didn't actually. You voted for billionaires to run the show.
What would be the motivation right now for Democrats to come back to the negotiating table and work with Republicans?
Yeah, so we know that Leader Jeffries has said that they want a the package that they had negotiated. They will not vote for a clean CR that strays from the deal that he had made with Johnson, and basically saying a deal's a deal and you can't renege on that. I mean, having Democrats, though, come out and say it's actually Elon Musk running the show. You and I have talked about the relationship between Musk and Trump, two very big personalities. Can this relationship last if now there are people calling out Musk as the real leader and not Trump? I mean, keep in mind, none of which are president right now and for the next month, but Trump definitely seems like he has slipped into the role of president earlier with his ability to drive what's going on in Congress. But will there be a rift in the Trump-Musk relationship the more Trump hears people say who's actually really in charge? Is it Elon Musk, with two very strong personalities? And another point is, what is Vice President Harris thinking right now? Because she warned on the campaign trail for like 3 months that this is going to be an administration run by billionaires and all these billionaire friends of Trump, and here we are. So I'm sure she's not going to say anything, but kind of funny to think about what she's now thinking about all this.
Yeah, and a lot of this does seem to be led by Musk himself. You talked about all those tweets yesterday, and then Trump coming in much later. You know, Musk says that it wouldn't be that big of a deal if the shutdown lasted until January 20th when Trump takes over. Republicans seem to be agreeing with that. Let's take a listen to what some Republicans were saying. This is even before Johnson pulled the bill.
Look, the cavalry's coming over the hill, so just do it clean. Don't put anything on it, and just like do it for short term, and then we're going to have a majority in the Senate. We're going to have President Trump in the White House, and then we can address the issues that need to be addressed. So
I voted. I'm a no. I was a no before I even came into Washington D.C. this week. I've never voted for a CR, and I wasn't planning on voting on this one.
So Republicans, with them saying they want a clean bill, Democrats say they're not going to go along with it. Marjorie Taylor Greene says she's been a no from the beginning. I don't know if there's a bill that Johnson can come up with that she'd actually agree to. It's true that essential workers would continue working in a shutdown scenario, but they would not get paid. Others would get furloughed. In 2018, when there was a government shutdown, federal workers were lining up at food banks because they wanted to eat. The economy could be affected. Markets are already a bit jittery over the unpredictability of the Trump administration. What do you think would be the biggest impact of a government shutdown that lasted through Christmas, through to the new year, all the way until Trump takes office?
Yeah, I think this idea of a shutdown, a lot of people don't realize this is real world, real people implications. I mean, as you mentioned, there's people that will be furloughed. There's people who have to work and wouldn't see a paycheck. And we're over the holiday season. There will be public service workers who work paycheck to paycheck who, like you mentioned, will be struggling like they did in 2016 to pay their bills. I mean, there are real world implications, and people who work in federal government all aren't worth $300 billion. And so, like an Elon Musk is. But I looked at some of the numbers, and there will be, systems will keep moving. Elderly people will get their Social Security checks. That's considered essential work. TSA and air traffic controllers, people travel so much over the holidays. They will work, but they won't get paid for it. Active military members will work, but they won't get paid. These are American military families who won't be able to get their paychecks over the holidays. And then there are some things that will close, like FDA inspections, that those people just don't go to work and these systems shut down. Another thing are national parks. I mean, there's a lot of people in this country who, when you have a day off, you bring your family to a national park, and we're about to get some days off, and that's their big vacation for the year, and which is wonderful that we have such great parks, and those will be closed, and people can't go visit them. So there are definitely some implications to just the typical American family that I think in D.C. sometimes we forget about.
I want to ask you about this defense authorization bill that the Senate has now passed, nearly $900 billion. It includes pay raises for service members, plans to bolster the U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific, and build new military hardware. There were a handful of Democrats in the Senate, also in the House, that voted against the bill over a provision to block medical procedures for transgender children of service members. If this was 2020, I imagine Democrats would have been more willing to create a fight over this issue. Do you think this is a signal that Democrats don't really want to fight the culture wars anymore?
I definitely think so, because at this point, as far as we know, and the White House hasn't indicated otherwise, is President Biden will be signing this bill, and he vowed when he was running for re-election, and even since that, he would veto any bill that restricts care for transgender Americans. And so this is something I think is part of the Democrat rebuilding process, that they're looking at some of these so-called culture wars, which includes benefits for transgender, especially minors, and thinking, was this a losing argument for us in the 2024 election, and how much do we want to put things on the line for to protect these kinds of things? I mean, if President Biden were to veto a must-need defense bill with a month before leaving office, that would be a huge signal, which I don't think he will, because it's part of Democrats looking inward and thinking, what do we actually want to make our top issues because of after this tough loss that we just endured. And so I think it's going to take some time for them to figure out how to rebuild and how to approach these kinds of issues. And right now, like you mentioned, Democrats would have put up a bigger fight if this was 4 years ago. And right now, I think they're just trying to figure out what went wrong and what they can do in the future. And so they're not putting up a fight.
Senate also moved forward on passing reforms to Social Security benefits for public sector workers, essentially allows some workers to collect Social Security benefits and their pension at the same time. There has been a provision in place to prevent that kind of double dipping, but some lawmakers argue it's unfair to people that worked in both the public and the private sector during their careers. Now, this is going to cost $100 billion over 10 years to a Social Security program that's already set to run out of money in the next 10 years. There may have been some unfairness, that's true, but I wonder if lawmakers are kind of whistling past the graveyard here when it comes to this program that's so important to people and is on a negative trajectory.
Yeah, it's really interesting that this has so much bipartisan support. And I think it comes down to the fact that it is supportive of public service workers and retirees in those industries. And of course, supporting our seniors and whatever else. But like you mentioned, I mean, this could exhaust the Social Security trust funds roughly half a year earlier than they were already planning on being exhausted. And there's, already questions and conversations about, when Social Security will run out and if the next generation will get those kinds of benefits that we're, paying into. And so this one's one, I think it's about protecting public service retirees, giving them what they deserve. But at the same time, I think it will start a larger conversation in DC about Social Security, because that's something that people don't want to touch. It doesn't look like a winning issue when you talk about it too much. We learned that from Senator Rick Scott when he brought up looking at Social Security. President Biden went on the attack right away, telling him this is not a winning issue, and Republicans will lose on this if they bring it up. Now, with President Trump coming into office, maybe conversations will continue about this.
Doesn't seem to be much of an appetite for cutting benefits or raising taxes to pay for continuation of the program. Alex Gangitano, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Breaking news today, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis has been disqualified as a prosecutor on President-elect Trump's Georgia election case. Willis was under fire over a romantic relationship she had with the top prosecutor on the case. The ruling from a Georgia appeals court throws the future of the case into doubt. Plus, Luigi Mangione, the suspect in the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, was back in court today, where he agreed to extradition to New York. More on that in a minute, but let's bring in the Hills Courts and legal reporter Zach Schonfeld. Zach, some major news today out of Georgia. Fani Willis disqualified as a prosecutor on that Georgia case. What did the appellate court say in its ruling?
Hey, Drew, the court in its 2-1 decision today found that romance between the district attorney and the top prosecutor who she hired to lead this case, Nathan Wade, that created a significant appearance of impropriety. And the court went on to say that that's enough to compel that the entire district attorney's office has to be disqualified. Now, this is a matter that had created a detour in the case for the last year or so. When the trial court issued its ruling, it had agreed that, yes, there was an appearance of a conflict here, but said that the district attorney's office could continue on the case so long as Nathan Wade stepped aside, which he did. The court in its ruling today said that the trial judge was wrong to do that, and this is the rare case where an appearance of a conflict compels the entire office's disqualification.
Where does this leave the Georgia election case? Clearly, this throws a major wrench into the district attorney's plan to prosecute Trump.
It certainly is a major wrench, and this really could be the beginning of the end of this case. If this ruling is allowed to stand, what will happen next is the case will be handed over to a group in Georgia called the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. This is a nonpartisan state agency, and it then would have the authority to decide how to proceed. So it could handle the case itself, it could hand it off to another county's district attorney's office, or it could hire a special prosecutor to lead the case moving forward. And we've actually already seen this scenario play out earlier on in this case, because back before these charges were brought, District Attorney Fani Willis was disqualified from bringing any charges against Georgia Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones because Willis had attended a fundraiser for one of his political opponents. And we saw this same thing play out. It was handed over to that council. The council then sat on it for about 2 years and then announced that it would not be bringing charges. So yes, there is a possibility that that group could revive this prosecution, but we've seen it play out before where it ends in a dud.
Will Willis have a chance to appeal this ruling?
She does, and in fact, she has already begun that process. Very quickly after this ruling was handed down, she filed a notice of intent to appeal this to the Georgia Supreme Court. So it will now have to decide whether to take up the appeal, and then if it does, it will have to decide what to do about these lower court rulings. But the other important thing to keep in mind as all of this is happening is the time is ticking closer to Trump's inauguration. And legal experts largely agree that at minimum, once Trump is inaugurated on January 20th, that this case at minimum is going to have to be grinded to a halt. And it really seems unlikely at this point that the Georgia Supreme Court would be able to resolve any appeal before that happens. So it's very possible that we get to January 20th, this is still pending, and that no further action could happen until 2029 at the earliest.
Earlier today, Luigi Mangione appeared in a Pennsylvania courtroom and formally waived his extradition to New York. Tell us what happens now.
Yeah, he is now in New York, and we also learned today that he is now facing new federal charges. He previously was charged in state court in Pennsylvania and New York, but today, according to newly unsealed court documents, he is now facing federal charges. He's facing a murder charge, a firearms charge, and then 2 stalking counts in federal court. And that's important because that murder charge in federal court, if he is found guilty, could make him eligible for the death penalty. So certainly among all of the charges that he is now facing, that is now, in terms of punishments go, the most serious charge. In terms of the immediate next steps, he is now back in New York. He has been extradited, and he now is expected at some point to go into federal court where he will appear before a judge for his first appearance in this new case. He will eventually be arraigned on these charges, and it will start proceeding closer to trial.
All right, that's all I got. Zach Schonfeld, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
The sightings of mysterious drones in New Jersey and across the U.S. are continuing as the public continues to speculate where the drones came from and why they are flying around. The Federal Aviation Administration announced Wednesday they have temporarily banned drone flights in 22 areas of New Jersey where critical infrastructure is located. Those bans will last through January 17th. The Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and state agencies are investigating the sightings. They maintain the drones do not appear to pose a national security or public safety threat. The authorities also say it is believed that many of the sightings have been legal drones, manned aircraft, helicopters, and even stars. Americans sounded off on a range of topics in the latest round of Emerson College polling, from their take on Trump's tariff threats to President Biden's pardon of his son Hunter to the looming ban on TikTok. Joining us to help break down the numbers is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks for coming on. Let's break down your latest national poll, starting with the pardon of Hunter Biden. How do Americans view that move?
Yeah, Drew, and it's not a popular move. We see that 52% oppose, just 28% support the pardon, and then another 19% aren't really sure one way or the other. Now, if we look at this by party, majority of Democrats do support it, 56%. We see a vast majority of Republicans are in opposition, 82%. And then a smaller majority of independents also oppose that decision, 53%. So I think the bottom line here is it was not a popular move, and likely one of the reasons we see Biden at one of his lowest approval ratings ever in our polling, 36% approve to 54% disapprove.
You also looked into how people view the potential pardons of people who were involved in the events of January 6, 2021. President-elect Trump has proposed pardoning some of those individuals, if not all of them. The results you found were similar to the pardon of Hunter Biden, but how does it break down along party lines?
That's right. And of course, this is a hypothetical pardon as of now, but it's similar numbers: 50% oppose, 34% support, 16% aren't sure. We see a majority of Republicans are in support, around 60%. We see 82% of Democrats in opposition. That mirrors that number of Republicans opposed to Hunter Biden's pardon. And then independents are more split: 29% support, 49% oppose, and then 21% aren't sure. We look at this another way. We see that 64% of Trump voters are in support versus 15% in opposition. So, overall, this is not the slam dunk among, overall with the electorate than it is split among partisan lines.
President-elect Trump has continually threatened to use tariffs against Canada, China, and Mexico as a bargaining tool. How are Americans reacting to that? Do they believe this is a threat to the U.S. economy?
Yeah, most don't think it's going to help the U.S. economy. And that's true for all the three countries we tested. We see that 49% say that Chinese tariffs or tariffs on China would hurt the U.S. economy, 50% for Mexico, and 51% for Canada. And somewhere between 32 and 39% believe that these tariffs help. Trump voters are much more likely to say that tariffs will help. See, 69% say that tariffs on China, for instance, will help the economy, whereas Harris 2024 voters, 79% say that it will hurt the economy. Majorities of independents also say that tariffs will hurt the economy. So I think in the big picture here, most folks don't believe that tariffs are really going to be a boon for the U.S. economy.
The murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson has made national headlines, and you actually asked voters if they approved of the killer's actions, while a majority of people overall rejected the killing. How did the reaction vary by age?
Right. So we asked how acceptable people think the killing was, whether they think it's acceptable or unacceptable. And there were some headlines over this, but 68% of voters overall say the killing was either somewhat or completely unacceptable. Just 17% say that it was acceptable in some form. Looking at those age numbers, we see just 10% of voters over the age of 70 say that the killing was acceptable in some form. Now, that jumps to 23% among 30 to 39-year-old voters. And then when we look at 18 to 29-year-old voters, they're split. So 40% say that it was unacceptable, 41% say that it was acceptable, and then another 19% are neutral. So again, I think it's worth emphasizing here that the majority say that the killing was unacceptable, but we do see that some of these younger voters, they forming a minority, do say that it was acceptable in some.
I want to shift to looking at this looming ban of TikTok in the U.S. Your latest poll shows that 40% support the ban, but my guess is that you saw a stark difference in opinion when it comes to different age groups.
Yeah, there's a similar age split here. So younger voters are most opposed. We see 50% versus 30% in support. And those are 18 to 29-year-old. You jump a little bit further into the 30 to 39-year-old, and they're almost split evenly. Same for 40 to 49-year-olds. And with opposition sort of growing among these 50 to 59-year-olds as you move into middle-aged voters. Voters over 60 are mostly in support, about 43% overall, and just about 13% in opposition. So overall, we see a plurality do support this policy, about 40% versus 30% who are opposed. So this is, all things considered, a relatively popular policy.
Last question I want to ask you about cryptocurrency. It has seen a major bump in support after President Trump was elected in November. And while it's often understood as an investment for younger generations, your latest poll shows some interesting findings about how racial minority groups are leaning into crypto investing. What did you find?
That's right, Drew. So we see that, interestingly, about 31% of Hispanic voters say that they have traded cryptocurrency in some form. Same with Black voters, and then 34% of Asian voters. Compare that to just 14% of white voters. Now, it's still true that those under 50 are much more likely to use crypto. About 1/3 of those voters report having used crypto. And men are about twice as likely as women to have used crypto. I think another interesting point here is that among these folks who have traded crypto, only about 60% say that they've actually used it to purchase goods or services. So this is not necessarily seen as something to buy things with, but more so as a commodity, at least in the numbers that we're seeing here.
All right, that's all I have for you. Interesting numbers. Matt Taglia, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Drew.
Amazon workers across the U.S. are taking to the picket lines as the rush of holiday shopping continues. News Nation's Mills Hayes is on the ground at some of the strikes in Skokie, Illinois, with the latest.
The Teamsters Union says that Amazon executives are risking ruining their customers' holidays because they are putting profit over people. And there are nearly 10,000 workers that are on strike in Chicago, New York, California, and Atlanta. Many of these drivers say they want better pay, they want better working conditions. But Amazon says that these drivers are actually individual contractors. They also released a statement saying that Teamsters has been intimidating and threatening and attempting to coerce Amazon employees and third-party drivers to join them, which is illegal and is the subject of multiple pending unfair labor practice charges against the union. The company says that these workers are employed by a delivery service partner, and they are small businesses delivering on behalf of Amazon. However, these employees say that they are Amazon employees, that they are only working with Amazon, they're wearing Amazon vests, and they want to be able to live better lives where they're not having to live paycheck to paycheck. They also tell us, this union and these workers that are out on strike, they tell us that this strike will affect people's delivery times when it comes to those packages they're looking for Christmas. The company says that it will not affect delivery times, and we do know that the people on strike is about 1%, less than 1% actually, of the amount of Amazon employees that there are. So we'll have to wait and see just how long the delivery times will be and if they will be affected by this strike.
All right. Thank you, Mills Hayes. California has declared a state of emergency over the bird flu as it struggles with 33 dairy herd-related cases. The state has the highest number of confirmed infections, and officials are trying to address the ongoing spread of the virus. California Governor Gavin Newsom is mobilizing resources to give state and local agencies additional flexibility around staffing, contracting, and other rules to support the state's evolving response. Nearly all cases have occurred in people exposed to livestock. Federal authorities are maintaining that the virus does not pose a significant threat to the general public. The controversial sale of U.S. steel to Japan's Nippon Steel is on track to be blocked. That according to a letter obtained by Reuters, which shows the deal has failed to garner approval from a powerful panel reviewing the $14.9 billion bid. The deal has recently undergone 3 revamped proposals to address national security concerns and has involved numerous meetings and calls with U.S. officials. The new letter lays the groundwork for President Joe Biden to block the deal. The Committee on Foreign Relations Investment in the United States has until December 23rd to approve the deal, extend it, or recommend blocking it. At that point, Biden, who has vocally opposed the sale, could put an end to it. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.